picturesque Rome itself, survive barbarian invasions, witness AD, and the most powerful man 1,000 years. Emperor Constantine stands on the shores the rise and fall of Islam, and doesn't know it yet. But he's about to create something that will out all this. It's the year 330 city that's about to become the center of the world. He that will echo through history for over A in the world is about to make a decision of the Bosphorus, looking out at A. It stood as the last flickering flame of Rome and falling. This is the story of isn't just another story about empires rising Byzantium, the empire that refused to die. For over a millennium, the bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds. This one of the most influential civilizations in human history, and expected it to crumble, and ever written. So settle in, because we've some of the most stunning art and architecture the world has ever seen. But herod Christianity preserved ancient knowledge and create, adapting, surviving, and thriving when everyone, a single city, became the heart of an empire that shapes what makes this story truly incredible. The Byzantine Empire wasn't supposed by the end of this journey. You'll understand how we're about to embark on a 1,000-year journey through triumphed it all. Constantine the Great wasn't it not only survived but became plague, invasion, and internal chaos. Yet somehow, under attack from barbarian tribes. Previous emperors had tried splitting to last. It was born from the ashes of a dying Roman Empire, surrounded by enemies, facing dramatic, so heartbreaking, and so heroic that it reads like the greatest epic 1453 is a story and he saw the future. This wasn't just about finding the way it finally fell in, and tragedy, through golden ages and dark centuries, nothing short of miraculous. Constantine didn't typical Roman emperor. By the time he came, the Roman Empire was already showing cracks. Let's start with the man who started, through the rise and fall of the Byzantine Empire, was massive, unwieldy, and constantly a different vision entirely. In 324 AD, after to power in 306 AD, The construction of Constantinople was strategically positioned between Europe and Asia, controlling New Rome, a Christian Rome, a decision that would change everything. He looked the empire into more manageable pieces, but Constantine had at the ancient Greek city of Byzantium defeating his rivals and becoming sole emperor, Constantine made a new capital. This was about creating just rebuild an existing city, a Rome that could survive what the old Rome could, the vital sea route between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, backed by the unlimited resources of the Roman Imagine, the most ambitious urban planning project in history. He created something entirely new: empire. Workers flooded in from across the known world. The greatest architects, artists, and engineers of the age were summoned to create a city that would rival anything that had ever existed. The city that emerged was breathtaking. Constantine's engineers carved harbours from solid rock, built massive walls that would protect the city for centuries, and created a network of cisterns and aqueducts that could sustain a population of hundreds of thousands. The great palace sprawled across terraces overlooking the sea, while the hippodrome could hold 100,000 spectators for chariot races that would make modern sports events look tame. But the crown jewel was the Hagia Sophia. Even in its first incarnation under Constantine, it represented something revolutionary. This wasn't just a church, it was a statement. For the first time in Roman history, an emperor was openly declaring that this would be a Christian empire. The old gods of Rome were being replaced, and this magnificent structure would be the symbol of that transformation. Constantine filled his new city with treasures from across the empire. Statues, artworks, and relics that had adorned Rome, Athens, and Alexandria were transported to Constantinople. The new city wasn't just inheriting Roman power, it was inheriting Roman culture, Greek wisdom, and Christian faith all rolled into one magnificent creation. When Constantine officially dedicated Constantinople on May 11th, 330 AD, he wasn't just founding a city. He was creating the capital of what would become the Byzantine Empire, though no one called it that at the time. To them, they were still Romans, the true heirs of Caesar and Augustus. They would continue calling themselves Romans for the next 1,000 years, even as their empire evolved into something entirely different. The early centuries of the Byzantine Empire were a masterclass in survival and adaptation. While the western half of the Roman Empire crumbled under barbarian invasions, Constantinople stood firm. The secret wasn't just the massive walls or the strategic location, though those certainly helped. The real strength lay in the empire's ability to bend without breaking. Take Emperor Justinian, who ruled from 527 to 565 AD. Here was a man with an impossible dream: to reconquer the entire Roman Empire and restore it to its former glory. Most people would have called him crazy. The Western Empire had fallen decades earlier, barbarian kingdoms had carved up the territories, and the Eastern Empire was barely holding on to what it had. But Justinian looked at this chaos and saw opportunity. His reconquest campaigns were legendary. His general Belisarius swept through North Africa, crushing the Vandal kingdom in a series of brilliant campaigns. Then came Italy, where Byzantine forces battled the Ostrogoths in a war that would last for decades. These weren't just military victories, they were statements of intent. The Byzantine Empire was announcing to the world that Rome wasn't dead, it had simply moved east. But Justinian's true genius wasn't just in conquest, it was in creation. While his armies were fighting to reclaim the West, he was transforming the East. The Justinian Code revolutionized law, creating a legal framework that would influence European jurisprudence for centuries. Cities across the empire were rebuilt and fortified. Trade flourished as Byzantine merchants established networks that stretched from Britain to China. And then there was the new Hagia Sophia. When the original church was destroyed in riots, Justinian saw it as a chance to build something even more magnificent. The result was an architectural miracle that defied everything people thought was possible. The massive dome seemed to float in the air, supported by engineering so advanced that it wouldn't be matched for centuries. When Justinian first entered the completed cathedral, he supposedly declared, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." He wasn't wrong. This was the Byzantine Empire at its absolute peak. Territory stretched from the Danube to the Euphrates, from the Crimea to Crete. Constantinople was the largest, wealthiest, and most cultured city in the world. Byzantine gold coins were accepted from Ireland to India. The empire's influence extended far beyond its borders through trade, diplomacy, and the spreading of Orthodox Christianity. But empires that reach such heights often find the fall that much more dramatic. Even as Justinian was celebrating his victories, new threats were emerging that would test the Byzantine Empire like never before. Plague swept through the empire, killing perhaps a third of the population. The reconquered Western territories proved expensive to hold and difficult to defend, and from the east, new powers were stirring that would challenge everything the Byzantines thought they knew about warfare and survival. The stage was set for one of history's greatest survival stories. How does an empire recover from losing 2/3 of its territory? How do you rebuild when your capital is under siege and your enemies are literally at the gates? How do you maintain your identity when everything you've known is changing around you? The Byzantine Empire was about to find out, and the answers would be more remarkable than anyone could have imagined. The 7th century hit the Byzantine Empire like a perfect storm. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, they did. The Sassanid Persian Empire, Byzantium's ancient rival, launched a devastating invasion that would last for decades. Persian armies swept through Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, capturing Jerusalem and carrying off what Christians believed was the true cross. But that was just the beginning. While the Byzantines were locked in this death struggle with Persia, something unprecedented was happening in the Arabian Peninsula. A new religion was emerging, and its followers were about to explode onto the world stage with a force that no one saw coming. Islam had arrived, and it would change everything. The Arab conquests that followed were unlike anything the ancient world had ever witnessed. These weren't the slow, methodical campaigns of traditional empires. This was lightning warfare, fueled by religious conviction and military genius. Damascus fell in 636. Jerusalem surrendered in 638. Alexandria, the crown jewel of the Eastern Mediterranean, was conquered in 641. Within a single generation, the Byzantine Empire lost Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. 2/3 of the empire simply vanished. But here's where the Byzantine story becomes truly extraordinary. Any other empire would have collapsed. Any other civilization would have fragmented into warring pieces or simply ceased to exist. The Byzantines looked at this catastrophe and made a decision that would define them for the next 8 centuries. They would survive, they would adapt, and they would endure. Emperor Heraclius, who had spent his entire reign fighting the Persians, found himself facing an enemy he barely understood. The Arabs weren't just conquering territory, they were offering people an alternative: lower taxes, religious tolerance for Christians and Jews, and efficient administration. Many Byzantine subjects actually welcomed their new rulers. It was a crushing blow to imperial pride, but it taught the Byzantines a crucial lesson. You can't rule people who don't want to be ruled. The empire that emerged from this crisis was fundamentally different from Justinian's grand vision. Gone were the dreams of reconquering the West. Gone was the massive bureaucracy that had governed territories from Spain to Mesopotamia. What remained was something leaner, more focused, and arguably more resilient. This was the birth of what historians call the Middle Byzantine period, and it would prove to be one of the most remarkable recovery stories in human history. The key to Byzantine survival lay in something called the theme system. Instead of governing through a centralized bureaucracy, the empire was divided into military districts called themes. Each theme was commanded by a general who was responsible for both military defense and civil administration. Soldiers weren't professional armies stationed in distant camps. They were farmer soldiers who lived on the land they defended. If Arabs raided Anatolia, they weren't facing foreign occupiers. They were fighting people defending their own homes and families. This system created an empire that was incredibly difficult to conquer. You couldn't just defeat the main army and march on the capital. Every valley, every mountain pass, every village had to be fought for separately. The Arabs discovered this the hard way during their repeated attempts to capture Constantinople. They could win battles, they could occupy territory temporarily, but they couldn't break the will of people who were fighting for everything they held dear. The Arab sieges of Constantinople were some of the most dramatic events of the early medieval period. In 674, an Arab fleet appeared in the Bosphorus, and for 7 years they maintained a blockade of the city. The Byzantines responded with one of their most devastating weapons: Greek fire. This mysterious incendiary substance, whose exact composition remains unknown to this day, could burn on water and was virtually impossible to extinguish. Arab ships burst into flames as Byzantine fire ships launched their attacks. The psychological impact was enormous. Here was a weapon that seemed almost supernatural, wielded by an empire that refused to die. The Second Great Siege came in 717. Led by the Umayyad Caliph's brother himself. This time, the Arabs brought everything they had: a massive fleet, siege engines, and an army that had conquered everything from Spain to Central Asia. They surrounded Constantinople by land and sea, confident that this time the last remnant of the Roman Empire would finally fall. But the Byzantines had spent decades preparing for this moment. Emperor Leo III, who had just seized power, proved to be a master of both military strategy and psychological warfare. He had already secured alliances with the Bulgars, who attacked the Arab army from behind. The winter of 717 to 718 was one of the harshest in memory, and the Arab forces, unprepared for European weather, began to suffer massive casualties from cold and disease. When spring came, Leo unleashed Greek fire again, destroying much of the Arab fleet. The Arabs retreated, but they left behind something more valuable than any military victory: proof that the Byzantine Empire could not be conquered by force alone. This wasn't just about military strength. It was about something deeper. The Byzantines had created a civilization that could absorb tremendous losses and still maintain its essential character. What made this even more remarkable was that the empire was simultaneously fighting on multiple fronts. While Arabs attacked from the south and east, Bulgars and Slavs pressed from the north and west. The empire was literally surrounded by enemies, yet somehow it held together. The secret lay not just in military organization, but in something more fundamental: identity. The Byzantines had figured out something that modern nations still struggle with. How do you maintain unity across diverse populations? How do you create loyalty that transcends immediate self-interest? Their answer was a combination of Orthodox Christianity, Roman legal tradition, and Greek cultural heritage. This wasn't just an empire. It was a civilization with deep roots and strong branches. The religious component was particularly crucial. The Byzantine emperor wasn't just a political leader. He was God's representative on earth, chosen to defend Orthodox Christianity against all enemies. This gave even the humblest farmer soldier a sense that he was fighting in a cosmic struggle between good and evil. When Arab armies appeared on the horizon, they weren't just facing an invasion. They were confronting a challenge to their faith, their culture, and their way of life. This fusion of religion and politics created something unprecedented: a medieval state that could inspire genuine loyalty from its subjects. People didn't just obey the emperor because they feared punishment. They obeyed because they believed in what the empire represented. That belief would carry them through centuries of warfare, internal strife, and seemingly impossible odds. By the early 8th century, something remarkable had happened. The Byzantine Empire, written off by nearly everyone as a dying remnant, had stabilized its borders, reorganized its society, and begun to show signs of renewed strength. The worst of the crisis was over, but the greatest challenges still lay ahead. The 8th and 9th centuries would test every lesson the Byzantines had learned about survival. Just when the empire seemed to have found its footing, a new crisis erupted from within. This wasn't about foreign invasion or military defeat. This was about the very soul of Byzantine civilization, the role of religious images in Christian worship. The iconoclastic controversy began in 726, when Emperor Leo III issued an edict banning religious icons. To understand why this mattered so much, you need to grasp what icons meant to Byzantine society. These weren't just decorative art pieces hanging in churches. Icons were windows to the divine, sacred objects that allowed ordinary people to connect with saints, with Christ, with the Virgin Mary. They were kissed, venerated, carried into battle, and credited with miraculous powers. Leo's reasoning seemed logical from a military perspective. The empire had just survived devastating Arab conquests, and Islam strictly forbade religious imagery. Maybe, Leo thought, God was punishing the Byzantines for their idolatry. Maybe removing icons would restore divine favor and military success. It was a calculation that would tear the empire apart for over a century. What followed was essentially a civil war over the nature of Christian worship. Iconoclasts, the icon breakers, destroyed centuries of irreplaceable art. Monasteries were raided, Their treasures melted down for gold. Monks and nuns who defended icons were persecuted, exiled, or worse. But the iconophiles, those who venerated icons, didn't give up. They went underground, hiding precious artifacts and maintaining secret networks of resistance. The controversy reached its peak under Constantine V, Leo's son, who took iconoclasm to extremes that bordered on fanaticism. He didn't just ban icons, he actively persecuted anyone who disagreed with imperial policy. Monks were publicly humiliated, forced to marry, or driven into exile. Ancient mosaics were plastered over. Manuscripts were burned. It was cultural destruction on a scale that rivaled any barbarian invasion. But here's what makes this period fascinating. Even in the midst of internal religious warfare, the Byzantine Empire continued to function militarily and politically. Constantine V might have been destroying icons, but he was also winning battles against Arabs and Bulgars. His armies reconquered parts of Anatolia and strengthened the empire's northern borders. It was as if Byzantium had developed the ability to fight itself and its enemies simultaneously. The resolution came through an unlikely source, an empress. Irene of Athens, ruling as regent for her young son, convened the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, which officially restored icon veneration. But this wasn't just about returning to old practices. The council developed sophisticated theological arguments about the difference between worship and veneration, between idolatry and legitimate religious devotion. These debates would influence Christian theology for centuries. More importantly, the resolution of the iconoclastic controversy marked a turning point in Byzantine identity. The empire had tested the limits of religious innovation and decided that some traditions were too fundamental to abandon. Orthodox Christianity wasn't just the empire's religion, it was its defining characteristic, the thing that made Byzantines different from Arabs, Bulgars, or Western Europeans. This religious clarity coincided with military revival. The 9th and 10th centuries saw the beginning of what historians call the Macedonian Renaissance, named after the Macedonian dynasty that came to power in 867. These emperors combined military brilliance with cultural patronage, creating what many consider the golden age of Byzantine civilization. Basil I, the founder of the dynasty, was a remarkable figure who embodied the empire's capacity for reinvention. Born a peasant, he rose through palace intrigue to become emperor and established a dynasty that would rule for 2 centuries. His reign marked the beginning of Byzantine territorial recovery. Arab power was finally weakening due to internal divisions, and Basil seized the opportunity to launch systematic campaigns to reclaim lost territories. But it was under Basil II, ruling from 976 to 1025, that the Byzantine Empire reached heights not seen since Justinian's time. Basil earned the nickname Bulgar Slayer through his relentless campaigns against the Bulgarian Empire, which had become Byzantium's most dangerous northern neighbour. The final battle at Cleidion in 1014 was both a crushing victory and a display of Byzantine ruthlessness. Basil reportedly blinded 15,000 Bulgarian prisoners, leaving one eye to every 100th man to lead the others home. When the Bulgarian Tsar Samuel saw his returning army, he died of shock. This wasn't just about military conquest. Basil's victories secured Byzantium's Balkan territories for centuries and demonstrated that the empire could still project power across vast distances. Trade flourished as Byzantine merchants established networks that stretched from Venice to Kiev to Baghdad. Constantinople became the undisputed center of Eastern Mediterranean commerce, its markets filled with silk from China, spices from India, furs from Russia, and amber from the Baltic. The cultural achievements of this period were equally impressive. The University of Constantinople was refounded, becoming Europe's leading center of learning. Scholars preserved and copied ancient Greek manuscripts, maintaining intellectual traditions that would later fuel the Renaissance in Western Europe. The great legal scholar Photios expanded the imperial library and wrote works that influenced both Eastern and Western Christianity. Art and architecture flourished under imperial patronage. New churches were built throughout the empire, decorated with mosaics that combined traditional Byzantine techniques with innovative artistic vision. The famous mosaics in Hagia Sophia, depicting imperial figures alongside religious scenes, date from this period. These weren't just decorative programs. They were political statements about the nature of imperial power and divine authority. Perhaps most importantly, this was when Byzantium began its greatest cultural export, Orthodox Christianity. Byzantine missionaries, most famously Cyril and Methodius, travelled north to convert the Slavic peoples. They didn't just preach. They created new alphabets, translated religious texts, and established ecclesiastical structures that would survive for centuries. When Vladimir of Kiev chose Orthodox Christianity over Islam or Roman Catholicism in 988, he wasn't just making a religious decision. He was aligning Russia with Byzantine civilization, creating cultural connections that would influence Eastern European development for 1,000 years. And so we reach the end of our 1,000-year journey through one of history's most extraordinary civilizations. From Constantine's vision on the shores of the Bosphorus to that final desperate siege in 1453, the Byzantine Empire proved that survival isn't just about military might or political cunning. It's about something deeper, something almost indefinable. It's about the refusal to surrender your identity, even when the entire world seems aligned against you. What makes the Byzantine story so compelling isn't just the battles won or the territories conquered. It's the quiet moments between the chaos. The monk copying ancient Greek texts, while barbarians hammered at the gates. The merchant setting up trade routes while armies clashed in distant provinces. The artist creating mosaics that would outlast the empire itself. These weren't just people trying to survive. They were people determined to preserve something precious in a world that seemed bent on destroying it. The Byzantines understood something that we're still learning today, that civilizations don't fall because of single catastrophic events. They fade when people stop believing in what they represent. For over a millennium, through invasions and plagues, through religious controversies and civil wars, through the rise and fall of dynasties, the Byzantines never stopped believing. They never stopped seeing themselves as Romans, as guardians of ancient wisdom, as defenders of Orthodox Christianity. When that final cannonball breached the Theodosian walls in 1453, it didn't just end an empire, it closed a chapter in human history that had been written continuously for over 1,000 years. But here's the remarkable thing. The story didn't really end. Byzantine scholars fled west, carrying with them the manuscripts and knowledge that would help spark the Renaissance. Orthodox Christianity continued to flourish in Russia and the Balkans. The legal principles codified under Justinian still influence modern jurisprudence. The architectural innovations of the Hagia Sophia can be seen in buildings around the world. The Byzantine Empire may have fallen, but Byzantine civilization endured. It scattered like seeds on the wind, taking root in places the emperors never could have imagined. That's perhaps the greatest lesson of this incredible story, that true strength isn't measured in territory controlled or enemies defeated. True strength lies in creating something so valuable, so beautiful, so fundamentally human that it becomes impossible to destroy completely. Constantine the Great thought he was just building a new capital for a struggling empire. He had no idea he was launching a civilization that would bridge the ancient and medieval worlds, preserve the wisdom of antiquity, and influence the development of 3 continents. The Byzantines thought they were just Romans, who happened to speak Greek and worship Christ. They didn't realize they were creating something entirely new, something that would inspire and influence people for centuries after their empire had fallen. That's the power of human resilience, of cultural determination, of the refusal to give up on beauty and knowledge and faith, even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. The Byzantine Empire reminds us that survival isn't just about adapting to change. It's about maintaining your essential character while everything else transforms around you. In our own age of rapid change and uncertainty, when old certainties crumble and new challenges seem insurmountable, the Byzantine example offers both inspiration and instruction. Empires may rise and fall, borders may shift, technologies may revolutionize how we live, but the human capacity for endurance, creativity, and hope remains constant. The Byzantines proved that with enough determination, enough adaptability, and enough belief in something greater than yourself, you can survive anything history throws at you. And maybe, just maybe, you can create something beautiful enough to outlast even your own civilization.